mother's two sisters. The older sister, Florence Mary Wright, she was born, and she became Florence Mary Barnbaum. The first photo is a picture of her wedding. And in this picture is her sister Eva, going left to right, Uncle Abe, who was the bridegroom, Auntie Flo, who was the bride, Mary Bath, who was a bridesmaid. She was Auntie Flo's best friend. And on the end is Auntie Flo's father, our grandfather, Matthew Frederick Wright. There are a couple of other wedding pictures coming up, and it's very interesting to see the way the different sisters dressed. I don't have a date for this one. I'd have to go into some other places to find when they were married, but I'm guessing it would have been 1935 or 1936. The thing I like best about this particular photo is the gorgeous long bouquet that the bride has. I think it looks just lovely. And notice the hats too, instead of veils and whatever. The difference in this wedding was that, of course, Uncle Abe was Jewish and Auntie Flo was not. So there's a mixture of things there that may explain why no veil, why a hat instead of a veil.
Mm.
Now, we're jumping to 1943. Now, that's my mother in the middle with the big fur cape, I suppose you would call it. I don't know that it ever got that cold in Brisbane, but there she is. She was a married woman by then. She was married in 1942. So she's standing with two gentlemen who remain nameless, but one of them represents the Australian Navy and the other represents the United States Navy, and that's in the backyard of 57 Fisher Street, East Brisbane. I've looked at both gentlemen's outfits and they're fairly similar, but they don't look naval to me. They look more army, but the citation on the back says it was Navy. Now, this is a photo of my Uncle Abe Barnbaum and Auntie Flo Barnbaum, and they have a parrot because they're at Currumbin Sanctuary in 1959. I have no idea whether it was a special occasion or whether they just went there because they went there. And there's a bird somewhere in that picture, but from where I'm sitting, I can't see it. Can you identify the bird, Shell? Oh, yes, there it is. It's on Uncle Abe's hand. That's where all the parrots used to come down, and they used to give visitors a plate of bread and honey, and the birds would come and eat. And they'd land on you and do all sorts of exciting things. I think that still happens at Currumbin, actually.
Yes,
it's a very
absolutely.
famous sanctuary. Have you done that?
Yeah. Yes, I have.
I thought you might have.
They also have climbing, an adventure playground.
Yes, it turned into a nice mixed sort of place. You can go there with your family for hours, whole day, I guess. Right, the next item is cut from the Courier Mail. There's no date on it, but could be worked out if you wanted to. There's my Uncle Abe with his glasses on, and this is Jim Sawley, who at that time was the mayor of Brisbane, Lord Mayor, because it's a capital city, and Uncle Abe was in the home called Hillcrest, and not about nearly at the Princess Alexandra Hospital. He was in there for a number of years when he couldn't be looked after at home anymore. He and Jim Sawley had a jolly good chat, and he imparted to Jim some of the items about himself, that he was now 87, that he came to Australia when he was 5, and his family are the ones that walked across from Russia to Vladivostok. And he also told Jim...
like a long...
Yes, it's rather a long way. Then they went to Shanghai and hopped on a boat. Then he also, Uncle Abe, told Jim Sawley that he'd been a dock worker for 45 years. He wasn't silly, but he didn't have a formal education. But he had a long and extended family of siblings, and he worked all his life to make sure they got what was, this was a land of promise for them, since they'd been thrown out of their secure jobs by the Tsar, with the Tsars. So, and that's a special sort of picture. And I'll tell you a little story. Apparently, when Uncle Abe went in.
It's really an intense escape story.
Oh yes, and there is a document about it. Um,
We shall have to get to that.
we will get to it, but it may not be read out today. Now, I was going to tell you a little story. When Uncle Abe went into the home, of course he was Jewish, and they need all your details. And Auntie Flo said he's Jewish, so no pork. He mustn't eat pork. And she went some days later when he was in there, only been there a little while, and they'd sent around ham sandwiches for his lunch. So that caused a little furore because Uncle Abe would have been amused and didn't eat it, and Auntie Flo was ropeable because that was her. She said, but she soon sorted them out, and I don't think they offered him so much as even a look at a piece of ham the rest of the time he was there. But they did look after him beautifully, and Auntie Flo used to go up every day from East Brisbane.
Is it because a ham's not pork situation?
Yes, I think the
chicken's not a vegetable either.
Exactly. I think it came from a base of ignorance in the best form of the word. Now here's a little thank you note from Auntie Flo, Max, Sandra, and family after Uncle Abe's death. I'll just put that one. I'll fold that over. So your sincere appreciation on
sorry.
Hey,
it's covered in windows.
Sending.
Fancy writing.
Yep, it's quite pretty nicely done, isn't it? So that was after Uncle Abe died, and people sent cards, and I went to his burial actually at Mount Gravatt Cemetery with the Jewish section there. Now this is Florence Mary Barnbaum and her son Max. I think he's just Maximilian. I don't think he has a middle name. I'd have to check up on that one. The citation on the back says June 1950. So they were obviously out doing something exciting. Max would have been 9 or 10, I would say. Oh, I was going to say Max he became a teacher and spent all his teaching life around Rockhampton and lived at Rockhampton for a long, long time, and just a few years ago moved to Canberra to be with his daughter who was unwell.
That photo, unlike some photos you have, which are from earlier than 1950, has preserved really well.
It has. Now
the cardstock has barely degraded. It's really cool.
This has been done professionally by, I'd say, wherever they were. Paragon Portraits, Magic Casket Agency in Adelaide Street. And I would say there's a professional photographer walking around, whatever the occasion was, taking photos of people. So you would have had your photo taken, you would have had a little ticket, and then you were able to go back and collect your photo, not the same day probably, but later on. Now,
1 hour photo.
This
great
one
movie.
Now. This is Auntie Flo at her 80th birthday party, which was held at her place. Yes, at her place at 57 Fisher Street, East Brisbane. And it's a lovely little cake. And the date on this one is December 1990, when she was 80 years old. And to go with that photo, there are a couple of copies of this one, so I'll just pile them up together. The Three Sisters, which I find quite interesting because I'm one of three sisters as well, and we line up quite nicely from time to time. So going from this end is my mother Val, her sister Eva, or Eveline, her full name was, and Flo. And I found it interesting that the two older ladies are dressed in florals. Now, my mother would no sooner been seen in little tiny florals like that than fly to the moon. She was outgoing in her clothing, so spots were the thing. She would have made that dress too and put the tie on. So, but you can see the family likeness. So it's oldest, middle, youngest.
Very cool.
Yeah. Now, as everybody who comes onto this earth knows, there's a day when you have to check out. And there's Auntie Flo's memorial service. Her dates are given there, from 1910 to 2003. So
We should do a review of 1910.
the inside
1910, music in review.
Music in review. Yes, it'd be interesting music actually. This is because it's a memorial service. Of course, there's all the order of service and all the things that happened during the funeral. And the one that I found nicest was. Excuse me a minute while I just move this. Readings from the scriptures, Christian scriptures and Jewish scriptures, and my cousin, or no, Auntie Flo's niece, shall we say, did for those who mourn, prayers for those who mourn, including the Mourners Kaddish, which Rebecca Kugelmas, who's Uncle Abe's niece, presented, and it was just beautiful. And the finishing line she said in Yiddish, and it was in my head, but I haven't been able to remember it again. But the finishing line is, "She was indeed a woman of worth." And when you're Jewish, being a person of worth is very important. And she was a lady of worth. She looked after lots of people in the family, and I lived with her for 2 years, and it was wonderful.
What years?
Did I live there? 1966 and 1967, when I was at Teachers College. And here's a little note from my cousin Max, who we saw before. This is his wife, Sandra Barnbaum, Sandra's son Garth, Auntie Flo, and in the front there is Naomi, who's Sandra's daughter. Max and Sandra had 2 sons, and then many years later, along came Naomi. I heard a good joke the other day. What do you call the youngest child? And the answer was a mistake. But pretty scary. Anyway, Naomi was a surprise. Sandra was well in her 40s when Naomi was born, but she was much loved. It's actually one of the stories that Max said. Yes. When he went to Sandra was in hospital in labour, and Max went to the hospital, and they thought he was the grandfather, and that Mark, the oldest son, was the father of the child who was being born. So that caused a bit of hilarity in the family for a while. Sandra, who apologised for the quality of the photo, but it was the only one apparently that filled her requirements when she wanted to send a photo. And I mentioned Naomi there, who was the daughter, and this is Naomi's niece, whose name is Petra. Petra. Now that was taken in March 1999, so Petra's in her early 20s now. I've never met her, but I've met Naomi over the years. Naomi lives in Canberra, and last I heard Petra still lived in Rockhampton, but you know what, young people go around the world. She could be anywhere. Now, Cheryl, you were talking about this piece of paper, which is only page 1. There should be some more of it. It's headed up Barnbaum family tree and goes right back to Uncle Abe's grandparents. So there's a bit of a family tree there, and many of the names are a bit unpronounceable when I can't see them clearly with my glasses at this angle. But then there's the story of how they
can't help you very much.
No, I mean, there's the story about how they escaped from Russia and what happened.
Oh,
and at the bottom is
Okay.
At the bottom half of the page is more or less what happened in Australia at the beginning of it. Then it says page 2, and it starts out quite nicely, and there's nothing more, and I'm sure there would be more to that. One day I might, if I feel the urge, I might ask my cousin Max to email me what might have been the rest of that story, because I know a few years ago he was showing interest in his family history and looking it up to see who was who in the zoo, or the Barnbaum Zoo anyway. Now, I know a Tannenbaum's a Christmas tree, and there's other Baums as well. I don't quite know what the Barren, B-A-R-N, Barrenbaums might be. No trees. Who knows?
And no spelling ambiguity like Berenstain or anything.
No.
No.
Barnbaum, B-A-R-N-B-A-U-M. It's what it's always been. And the one branch of the family ended up in America, and they're the same. So nobody's trying to pinch other people's names. So that's all I have in my folder marked Barnbaum family. And this next folder is marked Baxter family, which is Auntie Eva.
Now,
Yes, fire away.
is their backstory also that they were escaping the fall of Tsarist Russia in 1911? Was that when?
They were thrown out of their work. Okay, I'll read the beginning of it for you. Itzig, with his 2 brothers, became a contract butcher for the army. During the purge, being Jews, they were not allowed to be in business. Their land and goods were confiscated, and the family were exiled to Siberia.
Wow.
Not
Okay, I think that deserves its whole own thing.
Oh, yes.
But wow.
To find out more, of course, we need to get on to Max. Now, I met Uncle Abe, obviously, and a lot of his brothers and sisters when I was living, or when I was young, but also when I was living there. And they were very forward-looking people. They didn't sit down and, when there was a bunch of them together, they didn't sit down and mull over the bad old days. They talked about the good things, about what their children were able to do. What's the good recipe for this? Have you got grandma's recipe for such and such? They were a very positive family, which was really nice to be with. Now, this lovely picture is my Auntie Eva's wedding picture. Going along from there, on this side, it's Gordon Gilbert. Now, that would be Gordon, the son of Sadie and Stan. Next is Auntie Sybil, who was also daughter, I beg your pardon, of Sadie and Stan. Uncle Abe, who was obviously being best man. I think he was being best man. Then Val, my mum, who was being a bridesmaid. And Uncle Cecil, who was the groom on the day. Auntie Eva, who was the bride. And 2 at the end were down as Jean and Alec Baxter. So they would be relations of Uncle Cecil's. And I don't know enough about his family to know where they were. I would say possibly his brother and sister would have been there. Now, the other thing that I find interesting, actually, which I only just realised, I think the headdress that Auntie Eva is wearing is the same one that my mother had at her wedding, but we'll get to that in the next episode.
It looks quite elaborate.
It's pearls, loops of pearls. It's really quite nice. But now compare this picture with the one of Auntie Flo. Auntie Eva had the best of everything. Lots of bridesmaids, lots of fellas, beautiful frock with a train, and that was her. She was good at going one better. That was her aim in life. Again, I don't have a date for that wedding, but again, I would say 1938, something like that.
Gosh, what a time, like right before beginning of World War II.
Yeah.
That would be pretty rough, actually, because life as you envisaged it might have completely changed.
Yes. Cecil joined the Air Force about the same time as my dad did. So, so they got married just before it all got exciting, I think, because Mum and Dad had a a quick wedding and an overnight honeymoon, and then off he chuffed to carry on.
Speaking of exciting, who are these koalas?
You like the koalas?
What are their names?
K1 and K2.
How are we related
Right,
to the koalas?
How are we related to the koalas? Well, Auntie Eva, who was the bride in the previous picture, proceeded to have a family. Firstborn was Jim, but he's written down as James on the back of this picture, which I think is, I've never heard him called James. I only ever heard him called Jim. And sister.
I think most Jims actually named James.
Yes.
Okay, just
it's that. And the sister, the next
Reality
child was Lynette, and this is Lynette. So that's Lynette and Jim with koalas, and they only would have been at Lone Pine. That's where that would have been taken. It's not written on the back, but that's the only place where they would have been able to go and cuddle a koala. The koala's looking good, Nick, quite frankly. They look quite chubby.
Currumbin, Lone Pine, all of these wonderfully local southeast Queensland places.
Yeah. If you're
listening, reach out.
Sometime in the next century, when I get to my folder, there's a lovely picture of me at Lone Pine with the koala and me with no front teeth. It's quite cute, really.
I can't wait. But
But anyway, I think that's a very nice picture. I believe it was sent to Grandma, which would be to Laura May. That's who it's been sent to. This next little piece of information, 50, is an invitation to Auntie Eva and Uncle Sess's 50th wedding anniversary celebrations. And there's a little map there so you could find where it was going to be. And it was held at Margaret, my cousin Margaret. So there was Auntie Eva's children were Jim and Lynette, and then there was a break for Margaret. And Margaret was born a little bit before me. So I was born early 1949, and she would have been towards the end of 1948, much to my mother's disgust that she was named Margaret, because Margaret was my mum's middle name, and everybody in the universe knew that her first time she had a daughter was going to be Margaret. So there you go. But anyway, I got to be Meg, which I think was much more fun. There's Margaret's aplenty. And that is dated 17th of March 1989. And of course, being a
because of the way things are set up, nobody could see my whole body eye roll. Anyway,
yes.
Back to the 50th.
What I like is down the bottom. It's BYO. Throw your birthday party.
Before
bring
this
your own
was
booze.
sort of saying this podcast is going to be about get on the brain train.
Yeah.
Departing for information station.
Right. Now, here's the happy couple at the said 50th wedding anniversary celebrations. Uncle Sess would have been making a little speech. He was good at making little speeches, Uncle Sess. He was often the one who was called upon on a family occasion to, say the happy birthdays, whatever it was. I don't think that side of the family, they were not drinkers really. There were no drinkers really in my family. I'm probably the most sozzled one there is. But it's just, I think that's just a nice picture. And it's a good portrait of both of them. It's how I remember them as they got older. And it was the event was sorry.
No, you said it's at somebody's home.
No.
No.
It was at the Pension Hall at Portwood Street, Redcliffe.
Oh.
Because they spent they lived at 11 Broadway Street, Red Hill. Most of their married life, then they moved up near Caboolture.
In the background,
yeah. So this would be, yes, what you said, exactly. And they've got a little toast there. There's a glass in front of Uncle Sess. So he would have been responding to good words, wouldn't he, since he was the subject of the excitement? Now, this is another cutout from the Courier Mail. And this is Auntie Eva's funeral notice. Her down here, Baxter. And here's the notice that was put in the paper. That's, I think, all I have for Auntie Eva's the end of her life. I don't have anything else. So obviously her daughters would have other things, but somebody has cut that out and sent that to Mum, I should think, or possibly even to Grandma. But no, I'd say to Mum. And here's funeral notice and memorial service for Uncle Sess. And I did go to his funeral, and met people that I only knew by name, including my cousin Margaret has a couple of daughters, and one of them she'd named after Grandma. So it was lovely to know that there was another Laura in the family. Laura was a sort of a name that you didn't see very often, but again, it's one of those ones that's crept up on us. So here we have the order of service for Uncle Sess's funeral proceedings. I've written there, see back. Why are we seeing the back? Oh, that's why I want to show you the back, because inside it just shows you the things that happened, who spoke, and what readings were being done. But the little, I'm hoping you can read that on the back there. I didn't write it out.
True friend thinks of you. All others are thinking of themselves. Where's the attribution? I can't read.
Anonymous.
Oh.
Mr. Anonymous has
Well,
a
how
lot to be
apt.
thankful for.
Okay.
However, that was chosen very carefully because Cecil was well known for thinking of others and doing for others as well. If somebody needed something, he would be there helping. So then it's lovely that his family saw that and acknowledged it. And there's also a little cutout which I'll slip inside there. That's from the paper of his funeral notice. And that's actually all I have in the Baxter file. So we've seen the Barnbaum file and the Baxter file. And the next file I have it all pretty well sorted, but it'll take a whole session all on its own, is my mother's, and that's going to take quite a while.
Right.
So thank you all.
Why don't we pick 2 photos to end with?
What, from the ones I just saw, or two from?
Yes.
Okay. It'd have to be the wedding photos,
The wedding photo.
so you can compare them.
I'll zoom out. No, we can't get both of them in frame.
We can't.
It's not going to work.
Okay.
Just pick one.
All right. I'll just pick one. That's Auntie Eva's because she's got the whole box and dice.
Please move it up a little. Hang on, wait.
And since it's Auntie Eva's, there we are. There's her 2 oldest children. And a koala. And 2 koalas.
I like the koalas.
What's interesting on this one, you see Lynette's hair, and they used to ringlet it in rags, and see how it finishes there? She has a very long hair.
I was going to ask if they were dreadlocks, but I thought
No,
it was a bit too early in time.
Yeah, I think no, dreadlocks weren't really thought about in those days, but they used to put little girls' hair in rags to make ringlets out of them. So, but she's a very pretty girl.
The koalas like that. They really appreciate it. Anyway, thank you so much. Till next